Chapter 41. Stink bombs are dangerous. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Shrugars were attracted by the intense stench of blood in the area. They flapped their wings, unleashing repeated cries that echoed throughout the place, varying in pitch as they reverberated. Displaying their massive heads that blocked their stout bodies, the Shrugars flew towards the trio on the ground. "Come with me," Fielta said as she dragged Compass Carburetor, heading towards a nearby boulder as she pushed him behind it. She activated the wide sword on both her armaments, shielding the top and her right. Kaithai jumped in on time, doing the same as she shielded the left and the back, erecting a rectangular barrier. They used the rock to block the final side, ensuring to leave enough gap to breathe. Though, it was cramped inside, due to the limited height, causing them to hit each other while they adjusted themselves. The Shrugar cannot see. It relies on echolocation to determine its prey. But, it cannot differentiate any prey normally. So, all it does is attack anything that moves and hopes it turns out to be edible. "So, as long as we hide like this, we can avoid them," Fielta said, warning, "if you kill one of them, the blood would attract even more of them. Soon, we would be overwhelmed. The best option is to wait until most of them leave," Kaithai said, adjusting her posture as she gazed up, grunting when a Shrugar landed on the boulder she leaned upon. It patted the wide sword with its tail, tilting its head in confusion as it let out chirps like a bird. After staring for a couple of minutes, it took off to the air and swiped down, lifting the carcass of a Katana from the water. It flew towards a pillar, beginning to feast the Katana upon landing on the peak. Compass Carburetor focused as he noticed the streams of mental energy incident on him vanish one after another. Soon, there were just 3 of them on him. 2 of them were from the servants while the third seemed to be from the queen, judging by the familiar presence. The third stream only appeared at times before disappearing. He focused on the mental energy stream from Kaithai, judging that she just deemed the situation to be annoying. As for Fielta, it seemed she was having fun. It was odd considering how the 2 servants had maintained a poker face all the time, not once breaking out of it. How much training did they undergo to not express even the tiniest emotion on their face? As they waited, most of the Shrugars left the place, carrying the carcasses of the Katunas that Compass Carburetor had killed. It seemed the Katunas had indeed died, based on how they didn't twitch even once while being carried by the Shrugars. Soon, there were just 3 Shrugars in the place, loitering about. One of them just lay on the boulder, napping. Fielta patted Compass Carburetor, pointing at the Shrugar, motioning for him to kill it. He blinked, gulping for a moment as he observed, taking advantage of the proximity to observe it in detail. It had tough, grayish-purple skin, sturdy muscles, and short limbs. The limbs were too small for it to even walk. Their only function was the sharp claws, used to perch on the pillars. While he observed it, Fielta whispered, "The main attack of a Shrugar is the stink bomb it can unleash. The smell is unbearable to the extent we would be fully distracted once inhaled. And during this time, the Shrugar would usually carry us and drop us into the water body, leaving us to be killed by the Katunas. And while the Katunas are busy eating us, the Shrugar would pick up the fattened Katunas." She then pointed at its neck. Its second attack is its powerful mouth. When necessary, its neck can expand to a length of 2 meters like a spring. Using this, it can chomp on its foes and shred them apart. These are the main attacks you have to guard against when facing a Shrugar. That's why we only face them on the pillars and push them into the water after their darbal has been harvested. After all, a couple of seconds after its death, all the stink gas it had saved up in its belly would be released. Even though she had been whispering all along, the Shrugar laying atop the boulder had sensed the vibrations, getting up when Compass Carburetor jumped, touching his armament on its neck before activating it, piercing through. The tip of the sword peeked out from the other side of its neck as he grunted, exerting enough strength into the attack to sever its neck in one swing. And in the same motion, he made a second slash, severing the darbal crystal from its forehead, also inhaling a deep breath in the process. Picking up the darbal, he threw it towards Kaithai, hurrying towards the second Shrugar, noticing the other party's stomach bulge a little before contracting. Opening its mouth, it spat out a thick, murky substance at him. Compass Carburetor erected his shield, watching the stink bomb crash into it before dispersing into gas. Having taken in a deep breath in advance, he was unaffected by it, preparing accordingly when his opponent's head sprang towards him. It had expanded its neck like spring to do so. But, right when it was about to clamp him, Compass Carburetor activated his shield once again, smirking when he noticed the sugar failing to close its mouth anymore. But, he was surprised when the other party didn't take any damage, realizing that the sugar was able to open its mouth wide enough to fit the shield inside. Moreover, it applied pressure on the shield, causing faint cracks on it. Compass Carburetor scowled as he noticed his Darlac being siphoned at a tremendous speed, hurriedly placing the armament on his right before its neck, activating the sword. He activated and deactivated it 10 times in a flurry, riddling the sugar's neck with holes to the extent it lost all strength. He then decapitated it, frowning when it didn't have a darble on its forehead. Upon noticing another mental energy stream land on him, Compass Carburetor turned around in a hurry, activating his shield on time when the third sugar rammed into him, biting his shield in the process. The force caused him to be thrown back as the armament generating the shield was pulled out of his hold, thanks to the sugar biting it, unwilling to let go. The moment the armament left his hold, the shield disappeared. As Compass Carburetor landed on the ground, all the air in his lungs gushed out. He hurriedly inhaled in reflex, regretting immediately as his eyes glazed over. He had fainted from the stench. Seeing the scene, Kaithai was unable to control herself any longer, chuckling. Chapter 42. Fight on the Edge. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Fielta activated her long sword, piercing the sugar's neck. She then activated the wide sword, severing it easily. Controlling her laughter, Kaithai dragged Compass Carburetor away from the range of the stink gas, slapping him awake. Pwah! Gasping for air, Compass Carburetor inhaled and exhaled in a flurry, finally feeling like he was alive. Upon noticing that he was saved by the servants once again, he sighed, I have yet to get accustomed to the feeling of battles. My reflexes almost killed me this time. If they weren't with me, I would have died. Get up, we'll have to leave this place before more sugars are lured in by the smell of blood. Fielta pulled him up, pointing at the pillar farther away as she said, let's hurry towards that pillar. We'll fight some sugars there next. Compass Carburetor patted himself, regulating his breathing as he followed Fielta, skipping along the footholds on the water as they headed towards the closest pillar. He noticed some mental energy streams land on him from behind. Some of the Katunas are following us. The moment we stop, we'll be besieged by them. Fielta seemed accustomed to the action as her steps were lithe and filled with grace. She barely landed on a foothold before leaping onto the next. As for Compass Carburetor, he wasn't that far behind either. As he continued to jump, he followed Fielta's actions, replicating the same. Following behind him, Kaithai frowned as she noticed his mimicking actions in his real time improvement. Just who is this guy? For what reason is the Queen supporting him so much? Is it related to General Artika's betrayal? Until now, Ephemelia hadn't confided any information to the servants. Everything that transpired between her and Compass Carburetor was kept between themselves, keeping everyone else in the dark. It was also Compass Carburetor's wish since he didn't want anyone else to think about Regriel using the information he had provided. That would simply alert Regriel's system. He didn't want that. Moreover, every time he talked with Ephemelia, he was always careful in directing the conversation with General Artika as the subject. This way, any mental energy streams from Ephemelia would only fall on General Artika. And of the times he mentioned Regriel, he had done so while shielding himself, preventing any mental energy streams from exiting him. This way, he wished to keep Regriel's system as much in the dark as possible. In the end, this was the first time he was up against a system. So, he didn't know the extent of caution he had to take. And, even though he had thought through many things, he was still bound to make mistakes or neglect some issues. After all, he was only human. I'll just observe him for now. Kaidai thought, following Compass Carburetor as she maintained a constant line of sight on his back. Upon sensing suspicion, confusion, and wonder in the mental energy stream from Kaidai, Compass Carburetor frowned for a moment, following Fielta as he soon arrived atop the protrusion peeking out of a pillar. Keep up the pace with me. There's a good chance the Sugars would try to attack us while we are scaling to the top. Fielta said, running up the flight of stairs created by the protrusions, be ready to defend and retaliate when necessary. All right, Compass Carburetor nodded, running through the flight of stairs as he tightened his grip around the two armaments, soon noticing two mental energy streams land on him. The path of the two starlight streams meandered in the air as he prepared himself. Halfway up the pillar, he saw two Sugars flying towards him, preparing to attack. The moment they arrived to attack, Fielta and Kaidai distanced themselves from him, allowing him enough room to fight. Moreover, if the Sugars tried to push him into the water, they planned to jump after him and save him. Though, Compass Carburetor didn't plan on relying on their help again. He had already been saved twice by them. He wished to think and plan better so that he wouldn't make mistakes due to his preconceived bias of having lived a life of riches without any mortal risks. It was hard to change himself within a single battle as Compass Carburetor made quite a few mistakes. Though, he managed to handle himself, ramming into a Sugar with his shield while piercing using the sword alone the sides, targeting the neck. When the Sugar's neck elongated in an effort to push him out of bounds, Compass Carburetor bent backwards to the extent his back almost touched the ground. He then placed the armament on his left under the Sugar's neck, activating the shield. The shield expanded, hitting the ground, the protrusion on the pillar's side, on one side. The reaction force caused the armament to move up while the other side of the shield landed on the Sugar's neck. As the shield completely expanded, the force was transmitted into the Sugar's neck, sending it flying up. It was akin to a powerful hack into its neck, choking it for a moment as Compass Carburetor followed up with repeated hacks using his sword, by activating and deactivating it repeatedly. He then slashed, severing the Sugar's neck before kicking its body out of bounds, watching it cause a splash upon falling into the water. As for the second Sugar, it flew towards him, intending to crash into him when Compass Carburetor thought of a daring plan, making a short run before leaping towards the Sugar, activating the shield right before colliding. The force of the impact pushed him back while at the same time stunning the Sugar. Compass Carburetor landed on the protrusion, sliding a little as he stopped while colliding lightly into the pillar's sides. As for the Sugar, since it had lost most of its momentum, it crashed into the side of the protrusions, screaming in pain as all the air in its lungs gushed out. Compass Carburetor arrived before it, slashing at its face numerous times, also focusing on its legs until it gave out, causing the Sugar to fall into the water below. It was then besieged by the Katunas. Compass Carburetor gazed at the two Darble crystals he had harvested from the recent encounter, remarking, "They are bigger than the previous ones." Chapter 43. No time to idle. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 8 days since his first entry into the Ellipster dungeon, Compass Carburetor had spent most of his time fighting in the dungeon, increasing his combat experience. Thanks to Fielta and Kaidai, he never suffered any injuries. As he didn't need much sleep, Compass Carburetor was able to train for most of the day. Moreover, as long as he ate enough, he had enough energy to fight and heal from his injuries. Natural recovery, level 6. It allowed his injuries to heal at a faster pace. And, this skill was capable of accelerating the human body's natural healing ability. So, as long as he didn't sustain any unrecoverable injury, he could heal fully in a short period. Upon seeing his zealous training session, Fielta and Kaidai were enamored by his dedication. They were unable to understand just how a person could remain so focused continuously without slipping up even once. But, it wasn't as if Compass Carburetor was born with such a level of focus, nor did the money-making system give him a skill related to that. It was brought by the pressure he faced. The pressure of going against a system, a plot armor that was capable of performing unimaginable feats. If he wished to save his daughter, he had to work hard, defeat or kill systems and obtain system fragments from them. And only with enough system fragments would he be able to strengthen himself accordingly and become powerful enough to deal with the money-making system and save his daughter, Stencil. It was a do-or-die situation. After all, without his daughter, he wouldn't have the strength to live. With that determination, his focus remained unwavering, immersing himself in training himself wholeheartedly. Standing atop a pillar, Compass Carburetor faced a couple of Shrugars, tussling with them as he evaded their attacks constantly, hacking them little by little using his sword. And when they attacked him, he parried with the shield. He had already gotten accustomed to using the sword and shield, now able to use them as if he had been training with them for a year. This was brought about by his endless training and his skill of cognition. A normal human was able to train around 3.4 hours per day. Even then, they would develop some muscular strain and aches. So, they had to rest plenty to recover enough to train to the same extent the next day. But as for him, his developed body was his plus point. For a normal person, they had to develop their body first. But for him, his body was already akin to athletes from multiple sports. So, all he needed to do was train his fighting abilities. And thanks to his endless training where he trained for more than 18 hours per day, his growth was obvious. Having killed the 2 Shrugars, he harvested their Darble crystals, kicking their bodies from the pillar, watching their bodies plunge into the water below as he muttered, "It seems I am quite lucky. Most of the Shrugars I face have a Darble in them, no matter how small. It seems the Shrugars love you, considering how they throw themselves at you." Kaidai retorted, "If you become careless, you'll end up in their belly." "I'll never become careless," Compass Carburetor said in all seriousness, gazing into the depths of the sea of pillars. "Shall we head deeper? The Shrugars here aren't threatening enough." "Yes," Kaidai said when she noticed a soldier waving towards her from the ground, "Give me a moment." Kaidai descended through the protrusions, skipping on the footholds as she landed on the ground, speaking with the soldier. She then turned around and waved towards Fielta, signaling her. "It seems Her Majesty is summoning you, Sir Compass." Fielta said, "We should return now." "All right," Compass Carburetor nodded, thinking, maybe it's because I reached 30 Darlak. He had just reached that a couple of hours ago. So, he was surprised that she was able to notice it. Or maybe she might have calculated based on his Darlak increase daily. So, it was easy to estimate when he would touch 30 Darlak. Compass Carburetor accompanied the 2 servants, exiting the dungeon as they soon returned to the palace. He hurriedly returned to his room, took a bath, and changed into a new set of clothes, one proper to meet the ruler of the kingdom. He then arrived before the study, entering upon obtaining the permission. Ephemelia was seated in the same position, as usual, looking through a bunch of documents. Upon seeing his entry, she nodded at him, extending a document towards him, motioning for him to read. Compass Carburetor glanced at it, frowning the moment he read the first 2 dialogues. Regreel. I heard that the entrance examination to the Heroica Royal Academy begins next month. Let's enter it. General Artica. You do realize that we are convicts, right? It's not safe to head towards the Empire's capital. There's a fair reason the Queen might request help from Heroica Empire. Will be done for if that were the case. Regreel. You don't need to worry about that. I obtained an ability to change our hair colors and also slightly modify our appearance. With that, it'll be like we are entirely different people. Compass Carburetor saw the image that had been painted below the dialogue, showcasing the changed appearance of Regreel and General Artica. Honestly speaking, if he hadn't been notified of it, he wouldn't have been able to recognize them if he just relied on their prior appearance to determine. The changes were minimal, but coupled with the change in hair color and hairstyle, they seemed like different individuals. Now, both of them sported a dull shade of green hair and eyes, making them look like siblings due to some similarities in their features. But, that wasn't why he was worried. They are heading towards the capital of Heroica Empire. And, Regriel's planning to enter their royal academy. It's guaranteed that he would enter it. And once he does that, he'll have a free real estate of all the girls in the academy. Most of them would be noblewomen hailing from powerful families. If Regriel manages to enslave them, I can forget about killing him. Even if I manage to kill him, I won't be able to survive the aftermath. He was worried, thinking of something as he said, I'll head to Peckle City tomorrow. Chapter 44. Initiating the scheme. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Do you need any help? Ephemelia asked. Any plans involving saving General Artica in places frequented by people would definitely fail. We can't have too many variables at play. So, a dungeon that no one enters would be the best. Compass Carburetor said, watching Ephemelia's eyes widen in surprise. Smiling, he explained, I've been looking into the records about the perfect dungeon to execute my plans. And, I've found one. Situated in the barren lands of the Great Megwest Empire, it's the perfect dungeon. No, I won't allow it. Don't mention creating a trap there, you'll simply die along the way. The Great Megwest Empire is teeming with monsters. No human who sets foot there can ever return alive. Ephemelia shook her head, saying in anger, death is the only option if you tread there. Even the Heroica Empire dares not send troops into the Great Megwest Empire and only focuses on defending their borders. That's why it's the only option. Compass Carburetor nodded. Anywhere else, there's a great chance of someone screwing up my plans. He then stared at Ephemelia. It seems you have misunderstood something. I have never guaranteed success. Even if I put my life on the line, my chances of victory might very well be zero. So, I have to cut off any and every possibility of mishap. Only in such a precarious location can I at least guarantee something. And, I won't force you to make a decision. Compass Carburetor said, I'll go alone if I need to. My daughter's survival depends on this. Ha, Ephemelia sighed, massaging her forehead as she motioned for him to sit, I'll at least hear out your plan. Compass Carburetor stared at Fielta and Kaithai, this will be a risky mission. Are you willing to accompany me? The Queen gave us orders. We'll execute it without fail. Kaithai said curtly. There are two things you have to definitely follow in this mission, Compass Carburetor said solemnly. First, never think about whatever I do or behave like. And, we'll follow a set of code names to address our targets while relating everything with General Artica in the center. Second, he made eye contact with the two, no matter the circumstance, never come into contact with any man. As long as your skin isn't touched, it should be fine. These are the two conditions you must ensure to follow. BDNV, alright, the two servants nodded, showing their resolve. Ephemelia had commanded them to follow Compass Carburetor's instructions, so they did without asking anything. It was evening as a certain inn in Peckle City was busy. A middle-aged lady was behind the counter, giving instructions to the workers under her. The workers made food in a hurry to serve the influx of customers. Coluto, serve food to customers on table 24. The middle-aged lady shouted, watching a girl in her teens brush through the crowd, promptly serving food at the requested table. There you go. Enjoy your meal. Coluto said, watching the customers smile in response. She had a chirpy personality and spring to her heels. She was energetic, bringing energy to the exhausted people that began to arrive after work. As the people streamed in, her workload began to increase. Though, as a couple more people were serving the tables, it was manageable. As for the middle-aged lady, she socialized at times, exchanging pleasantries with the customers in an effort to make them loyal customers to her inn. While she was at it, she suddenly noticed an old man attempt to walk in, struggling in the process. He seemed around 80 years old or even older, judging by his slight hunch. But, his clothes were fairly better than the average person, signaling that he had enough money to get by and splurge at times. The middle-aged lady hurriedly arrived to help him. "Elder, let me help you." "Bless you, child," the old man said, slowly walking as he was helped by the middle-aged lady towards a vacant table in the corner. Upon seating him comfortably, the middle-aged lady asked, "Elder, what would you like to have?" "Something warm to drink, and an apricot holpus," the old man said with a hint of nostalgia. Upon hearing the name of the dish, the middle-aged lady was stunned, almost tearing up as she quickly controlled herself, saying, "Elder, we don't serve that here." The old man looked at her in surprise. "Isn't this infamous for apricot holpus? I've had it here many times in the past." "Sorry, Elder," the middle-aged woman said with a sigh, "it was my husband who specialized in that dish. And he passed away 3 years ago." "Is that so?" The old man was shocked for a moment before he shook his head. A pity, a pity. Such a fine young man he was. To think he went on before I could repay his favor." "What do you mean, Elder?" The middle-aged lady sensed something strange in his choice of words. "Did you know my husband before?" The old man didn't answer her, instead replying with a question, "How old do you think I am?" Even though she was confused by the question, the middle-aged lady answered truthfully, "Around 80 years old." The old man sighed at her response. "Right, that's how I look like to others." He then shook his head, making eye contact with the middle-aged lady. "In actuality, I'm the same age as your husband." He then asked in all seriousness, "You sure you don't recognize me?" The middle-aged lady was shocked before she scrutinized the old man's face, trembling in fear as she spoke. "Why, you are Parlot." "Indeed, I am," the old man sighed. "I feared that you wouldn't recognize my aged appearance." What happened to you?" the middle-aged lady asked in fear. "It's a slightly long story that I experienced with Grister 10 years ago." The old man said, looking around a little as he whispered, "We'll continue once the crowd clears up. I can't risk anyone else hearing about this." "Yes," the middle-aged woman nodded, bringing him some food to eat while she busied herself with work. But all along, she was conscious of the old man sitting at the corner of her inn, silently eating her food like it was his last meal. Chapter 45. A Great Empire's Legacy. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. It was late into the night when the middle-aged lady finished her work. And, once her workers left, she sent her daughter, Kaluto, to sleep while she walked towards the corner of the inn, seating herself on the table. Pouring a warm drink into a cup, she pushed it towards the old man. "Please, L.RG." The old man took a sip, relaxing as he let out a breath of air, expressing his delight. "This warmth is heavenly." After taking a couple of sips, he began to speak all of a sudden. "Grister and I had a past that we never shared with anyone." He paused, trying to speak further as he noticed that he was hesitating, failing to articulate his thoughts into words. He sipped the warm drink, remaining silent for a minute as he stared at the cup, finally lifting his head to make eye contact with the middle-aged lady. "Cariel, it was difficult hiding the truth. Grister tried to speak about it with you many times in the past but was unable to say it in the end. Even at this point in life, I am still struggling to say it." Taking in a deep breath, he sighed grandly. "The two of us are the remnants of the great Megwest Empire." "What?" The middle-aged lady, Cariel, was unable to control her shock, blurting out loud, "But, wasn't the great Megwest Empire destroyed 120 years ago?" "Yes, it indeed was." The old man, Parlot, nodded. "To the world, it seemed as if the cause for the great Megwest Empire's destruction was the dungeon break that occurred to their level 5 dungeon, Mohart Dungeon. But in actuality, that wasn't the case." "Then, what was it?" Cariel asked. "A forbidden experiment," Parlot said, "an experiment revolving around turning monsters into puppets by making use of the Darble growing on their foreheads as a Darlak connection point." "Did the experiment fail and cause a disaster?" Cariel asked. "No, the great Megwest Empire was too advanced for something like that to destroy them. Even if a dungeon break had occurred in a level 5 dungeon, they would have been able to survive the disaster." Parlet shook his head, dropping a bomb in the end. The great empire's collapse was thanks to the experiment's success. It succeeded. Cariel was shocked. She was aware of the power a puppeteer possessed. But, they had to expend a lot of Darlak to move the puppets. It was because the puppets were inanimate. But, everything would change if the puppets turned out to be living beings. The puppeteers wouldn't need to expend Darlak to move the monsters. The monsters would move by themselves while all the puppeteer needed to do was give commands to it. It would completely change the structure of the world's power scale if that happened. So, what led to their destruction? Based on the records, it seemed that when they formed a connection, the minds of the puppeteers were sucked into the monsters while theirs were occupied by the monsters. This swap was strange as it automatically caused all the puppeteers to form a connection with one monster or another, creating a strange conundrum. Parlet sighed. In the end, it seemed like this was their actual goal. To leave their mortal human bodies and inhabit the bodies of strong monsters that lived longer. Parlet shuddered. Every puppeteer in the Great Megwest Empire had swapped places with monsters of their choice. And, to prevent news of this from reaching other empires, they had caused a dungeon break simultaneously in every dungeon in their great empire. With every authority turning into a monster, the soldiers didn't have anyone to command them. And, as all the dungeons were located in the center of a city, when the dungeon break happened, the city walls acted as their cage, preventing the people from leaving. Parlet shuddered. Very few managed to escape in the end. Among them, one of the families belonged to those that had been involved in this research. As they weren't puppeteers, they were unable to swap with monsters and had to flee to survive. Parlet pointed at himself. That was my ancestor. Me and Grister hail from the same ancestor. We are the cause that destroyed an entire empire for our greed. 10 years ago, Parlet spoke, preventing Cariel from speaking. The two of us had set off towards the barren lands of the great empire in an effort to put an end to everything so that our successors could live guilt-free. But, holding tears in his eyes, Parlet's voice trembled as he spoke, we failed at the final step. We were inflicted with a multitude of ailments by the monsters that discovered our identity. Even though we managed to kill most of the monsters, 3 of them still remained. But we no longer had the power to pursue them. We fled from there, returning to our homes, or at least, that had been the plan, Parlet said, showing his arm, causing Cariel to almost scream in shock. For, it seemed to be rotting. Heaving a forlorn sigh, Parlet said, I began to rapidly age overnight. And by the time we approached Peckle City, I was already like this. So, I bowed ways, intending to continue on my journey. As for Grister, he was dying internally with the passing of each day. He wished to spend his final days with his family. Thankfully for his good deeds, he managed to live for 7 more years, Parlet said with a tone as if he was praying. But, Grister died from a stab wound. Cariel said as her mouth dropped, agape as she looked at Parlet's sorrowful smile, crying as she muttered, so to hide the truth until the end, we were afraid that you'll be burdened with everything. Parlet said, coughing vehemently once as he lifted the bag he carried with him, pushing it towards Cariel, it contains a scroll with a map and the truth about the incident 120 years ago. This is the final legacy we have. With a serious expression, Parlet said, whether it is your generation, or your daughters, etc. When there is someone ambitious enough in your family, they can use this. I don't think there even exists any bloodline of the Great Megwest Empire's bloodline apart from Coluto. Whether you wish to treat it as a curse or a treasure, it is up to you. If you wish to give it to someone trustworthy, you can do it. I'll pass over our once great empire's legacy to you now, Cariel. Chapter 46. Coluto's decision. You are listening at novelfull.audio. I'm sorry, but I can't accept this. Cariel shook her head. Ever since the death of my husband, we only wished to live a peaceful life. I fear this would complicate our lives and destroy our peace. That choice isn't yours to make, Cariel. Parlet gazed at her as his eyes slowly emitted killing intent. increasing in intensity by a notch as Cariel shuddered, "You are just a messenger. I told you first for the only reason that you can understand the situation. The one to decide the fate of our great empire's legacy is Coluto. She's the last of our bloodline. Whatever she wishes to do with it, I won't complain." Rather, Parlet finally dropped his gaze, sighing, "I don't think I can last the night. My time's up." He then got up, pushing the scroll towards Cariel, "Give it to Coluto. If you ever respected your husband, please do it." Parlet then got up, inched his hand into his coat, and took out a top hat, gently wearing it before bowing a little towards Cariel, exiting the inn. "My job here's done." Cariel stared agape all along, unable to process her thoughts clearly, feeling like a storm had passed. Grister was related to the great Megwest Empire. Does that mean, no, it doesn't make sense. I've known Grister since young. If he had been hiding a secret as great as this, how had I never sensed it until now? Just as she thought of that, Cariel suddenly began to recall scenes from her memories that she had otherwise not paid much attention to until now. Slowly, one image after another, the scenes of Grister hiding something over the years, the times when he was suddenly troubled, and the times he conversed in secret with Parlet but had just played it off when she asked about it. One after another, Cariel recalled pieces of information that she was able to make sense of now that she had become privy to the entire picture. My goodness, how could this be? Cariel slumped on the table, breaking out into tears, gazing at the bag before her, for a moment intending to rip it apart and throw it into the ditch. But, upon seeing the state Parlet was at, and the way he gazed at her, Cariel hesitated, unable to decide how she should proceed with it. Time passed in such a fashion as he sat there, contemplating, finally grabbing hold of the bag after a couple of hours, looking at the scroll within. The scroll seemed to be created from a mysterious leather of sorts, for it exuded a sense of quality that she had never seen. Even though it was old, and showed the age that it had been created and preserved for around 120 years, a look at it and Cariel realized that it was indeed the real deal. Such a fine piece of leather that no amount of money could ever buy could only be from a lost superpower civilization. After contemplating enough, she entered her house that was attached to the back of the inn, opening Coluto's room to find her sleeping there, blissfully. Upon seeing the peaceful expression of her daughter, Cariel was conflicted. But, once she looked at the scroll and recalled Parlet's repeated reminders, she wished to just tell everything to her daughter and then work on convincing her to not bother with the contents of the scroll. That should be for the best. What happened, mother? Has Big Brother Rigriel returned from his hunt? Coluto woke up when Cariel shook her awake, rubbing her eyes as she groggily asked. Silly child, Cariel nudged her, blushing a little when she thought of Rigriel, even though I shouldn't, but I am unable to control myself before him. Cariel switched on the lights in the room, gazing at Coluto as she explained in seriousness everything that had transpired between her and Parlet. Coluto listened to everything with rapt attention, finally beaming with a smile as she held the scroll. So, this was what father meant back then. What? Cariel was shocked as she looked at Coluto in surprise. Did Grister tell you about it before? No, Coluto shook her head, only the fact that he will tell me his secret once I grew up. He said it to me many times in the past, and also told me some stories. Now that you've said this, everything makes sense. He was preparing me for this eventuality. Now that even her daughter had confirmed it, Cariel could only sigh in defeat, realizing that her final hope of everything being a big joke shattered. It is real. It's now proven that Coluto is the last bloodline of the great Megwest Empire, unless some other bloodlines manage to still live on. But, now that she became aware of the secret, her life would change. I'm worried, Cariel sighed when Coluto hugged her. With parlous laughter, Coluto said, don't worry about it too much, mother. Big Brother Rigriel will definitely help me once I ask for his help. You might not know much, but he's strong. He'll surely help me reclaim my destiny. Can't you just remain as my daughter and take care of the inn once I grow older? Cariel shed tears, realizing her daughter's intention from her choice of words. I'm always your daughter. Coluto massaged her back, consoling her, "but, I want to give justice to Dad. I'm afraid he won't be in peace if I don't put an end to this sin our ancestors have committed. Father has expressed his worries about it many times before, saying it haunted him every day. And now, everything makes sense." Once Cariel got up from her seat in the inn and began to walk towards her home, something slithered on the seat where Parlet had been seated until now. It was around 20 centimeters long, serpentine in shape with numerous segments in its body, almost numbering 100. Each segment was a rigid piece, but thanks to its smaller breadth, and the fact that each segment was connected like a chain, the serpent was able to slither around freely. The serpent coiled around the legs of the seat, sliding down to the floor. It then slithered along the floor, following Cariel as she headed towards her home, silent in its actions. And, once Cariel entered Kaluto's room and began to converse with her, it slithered towards a corner, hiding within some clothes that were strewn about, peeking out from a tiny gap, gazing at the two ladies conversing. Farther away in a back alley was Parlet, leaning on a wall as his eyes were closed. Chapter 47. The Seed System plants. At the start of the story you are listening at NovelFull.audio. It was a chilly night as a cold breeze swirled around, creating hooting sounds as it moved through the alleyways. Standing in an inconspicuous alley, his face covered, and leaning on the wall was Parlet. He sighed, gazing at the sky as he looked at the giant moon in the sky, muttering silently, "That's at least 10 times bigger than the one on Earth." He then looked at his appearance, walking through the alleys as he covered his face further with the top hat, moving slowly, looking like he was about to die soon. He made his way towards a dim street, one that seemed to have been erratically built as more people settled at the place unlawfully. A group of thugs roamed about, smoking something that seemed to have been a liquid of sorts. The liquid boiled around while they inhaled it from time to time, intoxicated by the substance as they chuckled. Their figures were covered with faint traces of blood and filth. Currently, they were making crass jokes with one another, laughing lecherously as a result. But, upon seeing Parlet making his way towards them, or rather towards the building behind them, they snickered, making eye contact with one another. One by one, they got up and surrounded Parlet, grinning as they scanned him from head to toe. "This hag looks like it might die any second but is wearing some fine clothes. How much do you think it might sell? BDNVL.M, well, let's find out, shall we?" As they laughed nonchalantly, Parlet had his eyes closed all along, sensing the 5 new starlight streams incident on him. Upon feeling the emotions contained in them, he was able to get a handle on their characters and what they had been doing all along. The smell of blood that seemed to have been permanently mixed into their scent said wonders about what they did for a living. Parlet clenched his hand into a fist, muttering, "All my life, I've only had to wave my hand to make someone do all my dirty work. But now, my situation is different. To prevent my foes from detecting my plans, I should be the one to handle all my dirty work," Parlet said, making eye contact with one of the thugs. "What the heck is this hag saying all of a sudden? Did its brain go kaput?" The thug pulled out its zagged knife, intending to finish off his foe when his mind went blank. And before he realized, his body began to fall towards the ground. And on his forehead was a rectangular dot-shaped hole. What the? The other thugs were alarmed when Parlet moved his hand, condensing something in it for an instant when a thug collapsed. He did the same using both hands, killing 2 more thugs at the same time. The final thug was unable to even scream for help, scared into silence as he gazed at Parlet's arms that peeked out of his clothes while he moved his arm. They were rotting, seemingly oozing out gelatinous pus. But, Parlet's actions were indeed strange and terrifying, making the thug feel like he had entered a scene of horror. His eyes then blanked out when Parlet faced his hand towards his face, clenching it when something seemed to manifest in it. But, before he could take a detailed look, the object vanished while there was a rectangular dot-shaped hole in his forehead. As he dropped to the floor, Parlet walked away from the scene, heading towards the next street before entering an inconspicuous house. Upon entering it, he arrived beside a cupboard, taking out a certain book from it as he opened it, looking at the cut made into the pages, creating a section where a key had been placed. Parlot inserted the key into another book, twisting it when the bookshelf trembled once, opening to reveal a passage behind. He walked into it, closing the entrance behind him, reaching the end to arrive before a room. And, upon entering the room, he looked at the figures of the two servants who had been working on a skin mask of sorts. Upon seeing him, they just nodded, motioning for him to take a seat on the chair that faced a body length mirror. Parlot sat on it as the two servants began to work up from his hair, removing it little by little, soon pulling out an entire layer of artificial skin, revealing the face of Compass Carburetor within. His expression was somber, conflicted. Kaluto's statement proved that my conjecture was indeed right. But, am I really going to involve an innocent child in my schemes? Would my morality deviate even further in the future? He was plagued by worries. The moment Ephemelia informed him about Rigriel's decision to head towards the capital of the Heroica Empire after a week, he was worried. Immediately, he launched the plan, that he had discussed with Ephemelia, into motion. He embarked on a plan based on a simple conjecture. No matter how trivial it might seem at the start, a system always plans to make its host the center of attention. And for that to happen, it would make the host connect to people with hidden pasts that might one day blow up into a massive issue, enough to shake regions, countries, or even the world depending on the stage the host was at. And, as Rigriel had a system related to enslaving women, it meant that his first enslaved target would have a rather shocking past that would come into light in the future, causing waves that would affect the lives of countless people. General Artica was a gift, a bonus created by the system to show its powers and help Rigriel break out of the situation, also making him reliant on the system from that one act. So, the person he enslaved next should be the person he actually enslaved first. And that usually meant this enslaved person either had a shocking past, was related to something significant, or was the successor of a rather frightening legacy. Cariel was the first person Rigriel had enslaved. So, following that line of thought, Compass Carburetor used the help of Ephemelia and her information network to dig into Cariel, realizing his hunch was correct when he got valuable information upon digging up Parlot's grave. Chapter 48. Backdrop. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. It seemed Cariel's husband, Grister, was indeed connected to the great Megwest Empire. In this world, there were three levels to a country: Kingdom, Empire, and Great Empire. It usually dictated the size of the country, the number of people they held, and the level of the dungeon they had. There were a variety of criteria before a country could call itself a kingdom, empire, or great empire. In their continent, there were countless kingdoms, 4 empires, and 1 great empire. But, the great empire, Megwest, had been destroyed 120 years ago. And it was now overrun by monsters. The 4 empires each erected troops along its borders, erecting forts and walls to keep the monsters at bay and prevent them from overrunning their continent. It indeed seemed that the great Megwest Empire had done something, otherwise, it wouldn't have collapsed overnight. And very few people had escaped from it and survived in other regions of the continent, living their lives in hiding, terrified of their past. Grister and Parlot were one of them. And, unlike the other survivors who were simply part of the common populace that had managed to escape and survive by coincidence, they were part of a line of people who were part of the cause that collapsed the great empire. It was a secret conveyed to them from one generation to another, entrusting them to eventually put an end to the curse. And Parlot was the one who had been holding the key to the situation. In his possession was a parchment that detailed everything the great Megwest Empire had done. As Parlot was the older brother, he kept the secret with him. Moreover, he and Grister had concealed the fact that they were brothers to everyone, including Cariel and Kaluto. Determined to put an end to their ancestors' sins, Parlot had never married. One of their inheritances was an armament with 5 states, a relic of the past. Using that, the two of them awakened their Darlak, secretly training over the years. And, when they attained the limit of their development, they embarked on a journey towards the great Megwest Empire. But, it turned out to be a failure. The information they inherited from their father was only part of the truth. Once they entered the level 5 dungeon, they were viciously attacked by the monsters that had once been the puppeteers of the great Megwest Empire. It seemed that over the years, their humanity slowly dulled while their monster instincts had taken over. Now, they were monsters with the cunning and intelligence of humans, overwhelming Grister and Parlet, warriors who had reached the peak of the path, Transcendence. Transcendence, a state attained by warriors and puppeteers once their Darlak touches 1,000 units. They are people who can take on a kingdom by themselves. And, to think there were 2 of them hiding in a remote corner of the Heroica Empire. Compass Carburetor thought, recalling the rest of the information. Parlet had been gravely injured. As for Grister, he had been poisoned, slowly dying with each passing day. At that point, they despaired, giving up their quest, intending to simply cover up everything, unwilling to pass on the burden to their successors. After all, even with the peak strength attainable to man, they failed to solve it. So, they judged it as something unsolvable. But, during their return to Peckle City, Parlet was unable to hold on, dying in the process. Grister buried him in their ancestral home, one that was passed on to them by their predecessors. No one lived there, as it was situated outside the city in a remote location where no one ever visited. Grister also buried all their possessions, ones given to them by their predecessors, treasures related to the great Megwest Empire, in Parlet's grave. With that, he wished to put an end to this chapter, returning to Peckle City to live the remainder of his life with his family. And, when he sensed his death, he orchestrated a scheme to die from a stab wound, ensuring his family wouldn't delve into the investigation and end up finding the truth. But, reality proved otherwise. Rigriel's system was aware of the significance of Kaluto's fate. That's how it had devised a quest in such a way that Rigriel would come into contact with Cariel. And due to the powers he had, it was only due time before he stumbled upon the secrets that Cariel and Kaluto were kept in the dark of. There was a reason something like that had become a cliché. It was because it worked the best in working up the host, placing him in dangerous situations one after another, leading him into numerous plots and schemes. With that line of thought, once Compass Carburetor began to investigate Cariel's background, he unearthed everything. But, to ensure Rigriel's system wouldn't be alerted about it in case his helpers thought about the buried treasures, Compass Carburetor was the one who did the grunt work. Because of that, only he was aware of the truth. His allies, scouts and messengers sent over by Ephemerella, were kept in the dark, their services only used to gather every information of use. As he was the only one who compiled them whole, only he was able to piece together the truth. As Grister hadn't taken much care in the disposal of the truth and just dumped everything in Parlet's grave, it was easy for Compass Carburetor to find them within a week. After that, he created a fake scroll, one that contained information he had fabricated, a trap to lure Rigriel to his death. Since he was a business magnate on Earth, he handled numerous priceless treasures, historical artifacts with unimaginable value. And he was well aware of the counterfeit practices used to create fake antiques to replace them with the originals. So, he was well aware of the methods used in such practices. The scroll was something he created, and using many methods, he made it age and sustain wear and tear as if it was something from 120 years ago. And with that, his initial preparations were complete. Disguising as Parlet, he met up with Cariel, feeding her partial truth mixed in with lies that he felt made sense when thinking of the situation. Finally, he gave her the fake scroll. Compass Carburetor watched Fielta and Kaithai finish removing his disguise before putting on another. In the meantime, he closed his eyes, seeing through the eyes of his puppet, one that had been created successfully a week ago. He watched Cariel and Kaluto converse, hearing everything they spoke, conflicted all along. His heart was heavy at the scheme he had erected, even though he had decided upon steeling his will to do anything to achieve his goals. Chapter 49. Spy Dragon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Everything that Cariol and Coluto conversed was seen and heard by Compass Carburetor through his puppet. It was a serpentine object with a segmented body like a centipede. On its forehead was a hemispherical object that acted as a lens. This lens captured everything that happened at an almost 360° angle. But in contrast, the depth of field it could perceive wasn't too far. But, for spying in closed spaces, it was perfect. It had two modes of traversal. The first was the serpentine form where it used the segments to fluidly slither like an actual serpent. So, it was silently able to slip through tiny gaps and hide in discreet places. The second was the flying form. In this form, all the segments retracted, causing its overall length to only be 5 centimeters as opposed to the 20 centimeters in the serpentine form. Now, it was a rigid object, unleashing a pair of wings created by Darlac. Normally, energy blades created using Darlac wasn't flexible. They were rigid, unmoving. So, all Compass Carburetor did here was to create mini-armaments as the wing bones. So, when activated, they condensed a pair of wings. And, since they were attached to the wing bones, mini-armaments, and were connected to a mini rack and pulley mechanism, they could move up and down. As for the rack and pulley mechanism, they were attached to numerous mini-armaments that activated and deactivated accordingly, condensing cylindrical energy blades. Bedo de them basically, what he had installed in to power them was the same as a piston engine used in vehicles on Earth. As the armament here condensed cylindrical energy blades, they pumped the puppet to move. The mechanism to move the other puppets were more or less the same. They used the ability of the energy blades to expand from 0 to their max dimension in an instant, generating force while doing so. Beyond that were just gear mechanics. And, the Darble circuit installed in the puppets worked similar to electronic circuits but less sophisticated. In the end, they were able to achieve what he had in mind. To travel long distances, the puppet would use its wings to fly at tremendous speeds. And for missions, while investigating and spying on people, the serpentine form would be used. It was the perfect spyware. So, Compass Carburetor gave it a name accordingly. Spy Dragon. When he asked Ephamella about the type of puppet they used in their spy activities, she showed a miniature humanoid puppet. There was a reason puppeteers used humanoid puppets to manipulate. It was because they were easier. And, to control a humanoid puppet, the puppeteer only had to think of moving his body accordingly. So, it was the perfect puppet form. After all, it wasn't as if puppeteers could just sit in one place and focus on controlling their puppets entirely. If suppose they had to move, controlling any other form of puppets would simply err their judgment. After all, their bodies and the bodies of other creatures were different. So, simultaneously giving complex commands to completely different body structures was impossible. It was easy to slip up even with the greatest of concentration. So, every puppet was humanoid in design. It was the world standard. But, Compass Carburetor was different. He didn't plan on using a puppet to ever fight. After all, his affinity to the path wasn't high. So, when he manipulated a regular puppet, the Darlac expenditure wasn't worth it. So instead, he planned to only use the Spy Dragon to spy on Regreel. That was the only task he planned to use the puppet for. So, he made such a design. Moreover, when he was spying, he was mostly still, having his eyes closed. So, it was easier. But even then, it was hard to control the Spy Dragon. He only had a week's worth of training in using it. And, this time was short even for him, as the Spy Dragon was just too different from a human body. He was able to move it slowly. But once he increased its speed, he made too many errors, causing the Spy Dragon to constantly stop in its tracks. That's why he left it on the chair in the inn while conversing with Cariol. And, once Cariol began to walk away, he slowly moved the Spy Dragon, making it follow her. It was difficult, but with enough concentration, and since he was still the whole time, he was able to pull it off. And, once it was in position, he began to walk through the night, returning to his hideout. Now, having heard everything that transpired between the mother and daughter pair, Compass Carburetor sighed, feeling guilty when he firmed himself, my target is Regreel, and him only. Even though I have no other choice but to involve the others around him into the mix, I'll be sure to prevent any harm from befalling them. He then gazed at the mirror, looking at his appearance that now resembled a beggar. He looked like a completely different person now. Fielta then took up a perfume bottle, whispering while pinching her nose, "This'll make you smell no different to a beggar." "Thank you," Compass Carburetor nodded in gratitude, glad that he had such exceptionally talented people to support him. The two servants constantly worked in the background, prepping up everything he needed while he went about, motioning plans into action. Now, I guess it's time to finally make contact with the system host, Regreel. Compass Carburetor inspected his appearance, finding no faults in it, down to the minute details, frowning at the stench, but controlling himself, soon getting into the character, one of a beggar who had lost everything he had owned and now simply resorted to drinking. It was important for the next stage of his plan, one where he had to figure out the method to refine a system fragment. That would be the defining factor that would decide his subsequent plans. Compass Carburetor waved his hand, leaving the hideout as he began to walk on the streets, rolling on the road a couple of times to instill that down. To Earth personality present in actual beggars. He sometimes walked, rolled, and even crawled through the streets, escaping any prowling thugs like his life depended on it. Within an hour, he was completely into the character, now heading towards the city's exit, getting kicked by the guards a couple of times for his behavior, and basically for the fact that he was a beggar. Spitting out some blood on the ground, he moved forward, heading towards the nearby forest, all the while focusing on the scene witnessed by the spy dragon, watching Kaluto cheer excitedly when Regreel and General Artika returned from their hunt. "Damn, this is that pervert fat ass. With this appearance, he doesn't even need to rely on his system anymore to hoodwink women into doing his bidding." Feeling a headache, Compass Carburetor arrived at the entrance to a certain path, making home at the side as he took out a bottle of cheap, diluted liquor, smelling it a bit as he got drunk. Chapter 50. Spying the approaching foes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. "Big brother, we need to talk." Kaluto pulled Regreel to her room, showing him the scroll as she explained everything to him. As for General Artika, she only looked at the room once before heading upstairs, intending to take a bath and get some sleep. This, Regreel was shocked at the information Kaluto said, muttering in disbelief, to think such a thing had happened. "Yes," Kaluto said, pushing the scroll towards him, "I haven't taken a look at the scroll myself. I'm weak, so even if I looked into it, I would be unable to do anything about it. So, please, help me with this." Regreel gazed at the scroll, noticing that it seemed to have been sealed with a wax stamp, understanding that Kaluto hadn't seen its contents as she had said. "I plan to head towards the capital and gain some more allies while using the tournament as an excuse. Once I get into the Royal Academy, my life would be one of luxury once again. But, this changes things. If there's a treasure there, then I'll be able to become even stronger by obtaining it." Regreel had just thought as such when the system's voice resounded in his mind. Ding, quest. Solve the Great Megwest Empire's puzzle of chaos, quest difficulty. Grade, time limit. 1 year, rewards. Enslaved women slot +10, pinnacle puppeteer affinity, failure. Removal of Darlak, it's finally here. Regreel was overjoyed, obtaining a quest with tremendous rewards. My current slot of enslaved women is only 5. With this, I'll be able to have 10 more. And not to mention, I'll also obtain the highest affinity to become a puppeteer. The rewards are tremendous. But, the quest difficulty is A. Grade. He frowned, deep in thought, with my current power, clearing an A. Grade quest is impossible. The one I just completed was only a D. Grade quest, but even it took 2 days. Upon seeing him deep in thought, Kaluto was flustered, unable to think of what else to say. Now that she knew her father had lost his life in pursuing the truth in the scroll, she was afraid. After all, she hadn't left Peckle City since birth, having always stayed in one place. So, her horizons weren't broadened. And, even though she wished to accompany Rigreal, she knew that she would only drag him down. That's why she had hardened her resolve to entirely trust the matter to Rigreal. But, she hadn't expected Rigreal to think about it this much. She had assumed he would accept it right away, but reality proved otherwise. It was a blow to her fragile heart, causing her to almost tear up when Rigreal finished contemplating. Coluto, I'll be honest with you. This would be hard, if not impossible with my current strength. But, I promise that I'll definitely exact justice to your father. So, would you be willing to accompany me to the capital? Rigreal said, staring straight at her eyes, causing Coluto to blush as she nodded. Immediately upon doing so, she got up and rushed out of the room, her head bowed for some reason. But, as it was what he had been doing all along, and having understood the cause behind Coluto's actions, Rigreal was confused. He muttered, scratching his cheek, but, how is this possible? I never used my skill on her. It was late into the afternoon as Compass Carburetor lazed around at the side of the path, having fallen unconsciousness quite a few times as a result of the cheap liquor. He was someone that was unable to hold his liquor. Moreover, he was the type that got drunk just from the smell. So, it was impossible for him to remain conscious after smelling the liquor. But, that was his plan. Even though he fell unconscious, he woke up around 15 to 20 minutes later, completely clear-headed. And, he once again inhaled the alcohol, even going to the extent of taking a couple of sips, dropping the liquor bottle on the ground while he fainted, repeating the process numerous times. This gave him the perfect image of someone so drunk, he was unable to even tell day and night apart. Once his persona was successfully created, Compass Carburetor continued to behave in such a manner, at times closing his eyes as he saw and heard everything that transpired in the inn. Today was the day Rigreal had planned to set off towards the capital of the Heroica Empire, Grenston. So, once he returned from a dungeon exploration that spanned a couple of days, he and General Artica rested a little while he went through the scroll, reading it completely. In the end, he decided to make a prompt visit and finish a part of the task before heading off towards the capital. And, that was why Compass Carburetor had disguised himself as a beggar. The moment he noticed Rigreal and General Artica exiting the inn, his heart thumped, trembling as little as he was tense. Keeping his eyes closed, he focused on manipulating the puppet, Spy Dragon. In its serpentine form, the puppet slithered through the corners of the inn, hidden from view as it reached the exit, placing itself at the far end of its range of vision from General Artica and Rigreal, keeping track of them. Once they began to move through the streets, it assumed its flight mode, shrinking to a length of 5 centimeters as it took flight, landing on the roof of a house, making a swift flight from one rooftop to another. All along, it kept track of its targets. Compass Carburetor began to sweat upon the Darlac exertion as he was controlling the puppet from a significant distance. Had the puppet been any bigger, he wouldn't have been able to control it at all. Consistently, the Spy Dragon kept pace, hidden from view while barely making any sounds as its flight was always short and quick. But, once Rigreal exited the city, Compass Carburetor faced some trouble. After all, there was an open patch of land for a kilometer surrounding Peckle City. This part had been cleared out to prevent any sort of army from marching towards the city undetected. And now, this proved to be the most dangerous for the Spy Dragon as it didn't have anything to hide behind.